Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Jean Umberto. In this video, we are going to look at how we can set and get content from and to HTML. And we are going to use two important DOM properties. And the first property is the inner HTML property, and the second one is the value property. So let us have a look at this discussion. Now, the easiest way to actually get or set content from your HTML document is to basically have your element pass an attribute and give a certain value to that attribute. And attributes that are widely used in HTML as selectors are, for example, the ID attribute, which is right here. You can see here what we have done is we have created a div tag, which is a div element. Here you can see div, which start here and which closes right here. And right after opening the div, we have passed it an ID attribute, and to that attribute we have passed the value book name. So now that we have the value of the ID, which is book name, in JavaScript we can actually use this ID book name to kind of set content, which means adding content between this opening and closing div tag right here. Okay, so we're just going to look at how that is done in a moment in practice, but for now this is a statement that we can declare or write in JavaScript to actually pass a reference or to create a pointer to this div. So we basically have to say document.get element by ID, and then we pass in the value of the ID which we have given to the div. And by doing this, we can do anything that we want to do now from the JavaScript code, which will affect the behavior or the content of this div here. So to insert content inside the div, we simply write a reference to it. That's what I've just said. And now we are going to use the property inner HTML, and this is basically how we can do it. So we'll simply say document.get element by ID, which is the same thing we have done. That is a reference to the div we've just created with the ID book name, and then we'll say inner HTML. You can see when you put a dot here, we want to actually pass in a property or method. Here we got a property inner HTML. We simply say inner HTML, and then we say equals. Okay, so this is the assignment operator, and we pass it a string. We just want to say the book name is The Legendary Tale of James Bond. So by writing this statement, we are effectively passing the value The Legendary Tale of James Bond into the div with the ID book name. Now there is one thing that we should actually figure out here. We have to notice that this statement is lengthy, and it's kind of not good to write long statement in programming. So the best approach is to take this reference here, okay, document.get element by ID book name, and store it or keep it in a variable. And this is what I've done right here. So we'll say var book. We create a variable with the name book, and we pass it the reference to that div, and it is document.get element by ID, and exactly the same that we did on top here. That's book name, and that is the end, of course, of the statement. So down here now we could simply say book, which is now the name of this variable. We'll say book.inner HTML. So now we are addressing this DOM property in HTML, and now that assignment operator is here again. So we'll say equals The Legendary Tale of James Bond. So it is actually better to write these two statements here to affect the change inside the book name ID, okay, instead of writing a very long statement here. Okay, but either way your code will work. The second approach is much better because we can make use of this variable somewhere else. Whenever we need it, we simply have to address or call that book variable just by writing it and doing whatever we want to do to that particular div. We could do things such as make it disappear for a moment, like hiding it. Okay, we could change the color or the background of the div depending on really what we want to do with it. Okay, so there are some important notes that I need to make here. Not all HTML elements use the inner HTML property to set or get value from the page. For example, form elements such as your input, your select, or your text area use the value property. Okay, so instead of using the inner HTML property, which is used generally for containers, for example, the div, the table, the UL, which is the list, and so forth, form element use the value property. And here's an example. Let's say you've created a form and you want to collect the user's ID number, and you basically create an input field, which we will do of course when you start practicing, and then you create a variable that is person ID. This is just an example. You can actually use any variable name that you want, and then you'll say this person ID is going to hold the reference to that input, that is document.getElement by ID PID. So this is supposedly the ID that you've passed to that input. Now you can talk to that particular input by simply saying person ID, which is this variable that you've created here, and say dot value. So here you're now passing value 888999 right inside that input. So instead of saying inner HTML to an input field or to form field that you say in general, it's much better to use and actually not much better, but it's simply correct to use the dot value. Okay, so you don't use inner HTML, but rather use the dot value. Okay, so now you know how to set content to an HTML element, but what about getting it back? So you can use the same property, which is the inner HTML property or the value property, to actually get your content back. And here's an example. Let's say you've got a variable that you named book, and that variable holds the reference to an object or an element on your page with an ID book name. Okay, so that is a declaration once again, document.getElement by ID, and that is the ID of the element. So to get your content back, you'll basically write almost the same syntax. So you'll say alert, for example, if you want to alert whatever value or whatever content you have from that object or that element, you simply say alert book.inner HTML. So notice that here we have not written, or we have not declared or put any assignment operator. So we simply say book.inner HTML, and that returns the value or the content that is stored or that exists inside that particular element. So again, the difference is there is no assignment operator. When you put the assignment operator after the inner HTML, you are actually setting, not getting the value. So when you simply want to get the value, just say book or your variable dot inner HTML, not book dot inner HTML equal something. So where can we use the inner HTML and where can we use the value property? Use the inner HTML property on elements such as the div, the span, the paragraph tag, or the list, or the table data, or the table row, or the unordered or ordered list, the table tag, and other forms of HTML container tags. Okay, so when you think about those tags which can be classified as containers, you can simply use the inner HTML to actually set or get the content. And what about the value property? The value property is generally used on form elements. So when you create the user form, like you want to collect the username or the age of the person or the ID number or some, you know, some content, any information that you really want to collect from the user inside the form, you can actually use the value property on those elements to set or get the value. So thank you for watching. We are now going to move on to the practical aspect of the discussion, and I hope it will clarify everything. Thank you for watching.